Morning. Okay, so we got up to the bottom of page Ration and Aleph, and we did all of the Imrei Yaakov on the page. There's no. Let's see. Let's take a look at the Likutim on the bottom. Omer. Oh no, actually we haven't gotten up to that section yet. So we're up to Sif Yud Zayin. Okay, so yesterday we said that it all depends upon the convention, and that if the Balabayas has already established a pattern of not paying except on specific days, then no employee who works for him can have a grievance of Baltolin if he doesn't get paid at the end of the day. And nor is the Balabayas in violation because there's no expectation of receiving compensation. So Yud Zayin, Omer Lishlucho, if a person says to his proxy, says to his foreman, his manager, say Yuschorli Poalim V'Sachram, V'Omer Lahem Scharchem al Balabayas. And so he says, go out and hire me workers, and the guy hires workers and says, the Balabayas is paying. In other words, you'll get your paycheck from the boss. Okay. So we saw this. We did this already. Right. We did this already. So neither party can be in violation. So let's take a look at the Likutim. Ha'omer lishlucho. Yesh omrim da hashaleach shliach likro l'rofe ploni. So I have my wife or my secretary or whoever I ask to call. I say, do me a favor, make an appointment with me with Dr. So-and-so. And Dr. So-and-so is a specialist, and it's well known that he has a certain fee for his services because, he's the best doctor in town, right? Chal al balabayas din lo tolim. So he says, in that situation, the patient cannot claim, well, I had my secretary call, so I can't be in violation of Baltolin if I don't pay for services rendered after the appointment. And the reason is that you are in violation is that the Gemara only gives a dispensation if I say to my foreman or my manager, go and hire workers. The hashaliach socher upose kaschar, because in that situation, the foreman is the one not only who's retaining the services of employees, but is also telling them how much they're going to get paid. But in a situation like this, the secretary who's calling to make an appointment is not delineating how much the patient is going to pay to, so to speak, the employee, the service provider. Begama balabayas eno poret lo eza poalim virak az poter habalabayas. And the balabayas is not authorizing the foreman to go out and hire workers, indiscriminate workers. He's saying specifically, I want you to get Dr. So-and-so. The Havi Sachir Shel Hashaliach the Midaito Schara. He says that in that situation where the case of the Gemara is where I send my administrator, my foreman, or whatever it is, my manager, and I empower him with a tremendous amount of ability to control who the employees are going to be. So that's the reason why the Gemara says you've got two very powerful entities. You've got the boss of the company, and you've got the manager who's going out to hire the workers. There's a very significant division of power, and that's the reason why neither party will be in violation of Baltolin, because the boss of the company, the CEO of the company, just said, hire workers. He didn't tell him which workers he should hire. He didn't tell them what the fee was going to be. He basically left it up to the manager to make those decisions and to set up, so to speak, a work arrangement. When I go to a person who's a service provider and he's already set up the fees, and I've told my manager or my secretary, go and make an appointment with the service provider, there's very little power in the hands of that person making the call to make the appointment. We're sort of more at the mercy of the service provider, the physician in this example. And that's the reason why there's not real division of power between the patient and the person that he asks to make the call to set up the appointment. The person making the call to set up the appointment is merely a proxy. They don't have that, there's no real division of power in that case. And therefore, if I, as the patient, do not pay the service provider in a timely fashion when services are rendered, then I'm in violation of Baal Talmud.
Sorry for interrupting, Rabbi. I was waiting for an opportunity. I don't know whether you know that the screen's not being shared.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Let me put that up right now. Okay. So that's just and Stern is left with the Tzarachian. He says he's not sure whether he sees that distinction as being significant, but he is quoting a sefer called to Shilas Teshuvos to Shuras Chai. Okay. So next case in the Likutim. Yesh lehistapek im nasan mos l'shaliach sheyishalem lepol shelo bizmano im yuchal lismoch al zeh. So he says, it's not clear to me if I give money. We said before that if I give money to a third party and I tell the employee, go to the third party and he'll pay you, then I'm not in violation of Baal Talmud if that person doesn't give him the money, or if the guy refuses to go to that person. Now, can I rely on it? Acharei dekaimelan de b'deoraisa lo amrinan chazaka shaliach osa shlichusa. The question is, can I rely on my proxy to do what he's been told to do? And there are many cases in halacha that you can't rely on a third party to fulfill a mitzvah deoraisa. So, like, for example, if I go tell a third party, go ahead and do a bris on my son, but I'm not present, can I assume that he's going to do what I've asked him to do? So that there are many cases in biblical, when it comes to deoraisa law, that I can't rely on a shaliach unless I'm mamish standing right there. So that's the reason why he raises this doubt. But it seems pretty clear from the halachas that we've learned up until now that you can rely on a shaliach, and I'm not really sure where Rav Stern raises this doubt over here. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. So let's explain why, when I tell my manager to go and hire workers, and the manager is the one who stipulates the terms of employment, then both of us are going to be exempt from Baal Talmud if the payment is not rendered at the end of the day. So he writes in the Imrei Yaakov, Perush, Abalabayis pater lefi shalohu scharam. The Balabayis is going to be pater because he's not the one who hired the workers. And we don't say in this kind of scenario that a person's shaliach, a person's proxy, acts in his stead, and it's therefore as if he himself hired them. The kol shekain heicha shelo niskar klal af al yedei shaliach rak sha'asa malacha me'atzmo. And this is certainly going to be true, let's say, when the guy wasn't hired at all. Let's say a person voluntarily goes ahead and mows my lawn. So we've learned previously that if someone renders service to you, you have to pay for the service even if you didn't ask for it. But the only difference being is that you get to determine what the value of that service is. But you do have to pay for it if you do benefit from it. So, but there's not going to be a prohibition of Baal Talmud if a person goes ahead and provides service to you and you never ask them to. Why? Because one of the criteria that you need in order to be in violation of Baal Tolin is that you yourself have had to hire the person. So Mikol Makom Lekabo Mishum Baal Tolin V'ayin B'likuchim Shevenu Kama Pratim B'dinim Hanogim L'Schar Shadchanus. So we're going to talk about in the Likutim the rules of paying a shadchan for their services and how that applies to the prohibition of Baal Tolin. When do you have to pay a shadchan? When you don't, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But we also said that even though the balabayas will not be in violation of Baal Tolin in that situation, he will still, if he has the money, he will still be in violation of the scripture from Mishlei, the Nach scripture. He'll still be in violation. The Chavin Litchosim, because his objective is just really to push the guy off and tell him to come back later. She'eno Torud, because he's not busy at the moment, and that's clearly wrong. And then the Imrei Yaakov says, "V'imscharim stam, v'lo amar lahem scharchem ala balabayis." And then we also learned yesterday that if the manager doesn't represent himself as being just the manager, but he represents himself as being the CEO, and he just basically says, these will be your wages, and it's not clear to the employee that this person is really just the manager and is not himself the owner of the company. So then the manager will at times be oiver on Baal Tolin because the employee was relying on the person who hired him as being the one in control. So remember, we learned a couple of things. We learned that if the manager is in control of the funds, so then he will be in violation of Baal Tolin. And we also learned that if the manager doesn't represent himself clearly as being just a manager and himself an employee, but instead gives the impression that he's the boss, then he will be over on Baal Tolin. And so therefore, even if he doesn't say explicitly, then I'm responsible for paying you, but he just merely gives that impression, so then he'll also be over on Baal Tolin. Okay. So let's take a look at the Likutim on this going forward. Shalos Charam. So we had learned that the reason why the Balabayas is pater from Baal Tolin is because he's not the one that hired the workers. Now, so therefore, let's take a look at the Likutim. Shadchan Shabame Atzmo, Ein Bo Mishum Baal Tolin. So we know that there's something called Shadchanas. What is Shadchanas? It's the amount that you pay to a person who made a match for your son or your daughter. And the shadchan in many communities, the more Haredi communities, it's only the parents of the girl that have to pay the shadchanas because it's viewed as more difficult to marry off your daughter than to marry off your son. So, and in many communities, it's standard protocol that the shadchan fetches a certain amount. So let's say a shadchan comes unsolicited and sets up your child on a date. And then they come to you and say, I'm so glad I was able to seal this deal. Wasn't easy. And I'll send you my invoice for my shadchanas. So before we get into whether or not you have to pay, there's for sure no prohibition of Baal Tolin because you never hired the shadchan. You never retained their services, so to speak. Aval im shalachuhu havi kishar kablan. But if you did retain the services of the shadchan, and even if the shadchan solicited you and said, would you like me to look for your child? And you say, yes, I'd like to retain your services. The shadchan says, here's who I have in mind. And would you like me to go ahead? And you go and say, yes. So then as soon as the deal is made, you could potentially be over and Baal Tolin. You have to pay them that night of the l'chaim. Okay? The kaven shahaminhag, shahahorim mishalmim below hechatan. And since the minhag is that the parents of the chassan and the kala pay, and not the chassan himself, avalei kaomer scharcha alai va'over. Then it's as if the parents are saying, we're the ones who are responsible for payment. Even if they don't say that explicitly, it's implicit. Over. And therefore, there are communities where they write the Tanoim at the time of the engagement. And so therefore, that's when payment is due to the Shadchan. Gam b'makom deba me'atzmo d'leka mishum baltolin mikol makom chayv lo scharo b'mekubal. He says, and furthermore, even when you can say that the Shadchan came on their own, and therefore there's no issue of baltolin, but if there is a standard that is accepted within this particular community, that the Shadchan fetches a certain fee, let's say in some circles it could be $2,000, in some circles it could be even more than that. So if that's the standard that's established, so then you have to pay it. V'haminhag bizmanenu shel meshalmin lemiyad la'achar ha'irisin v'hainu la'achar hakinyan. He says our minhag is to pay immediately after the engagement, which is after they do the tanoim. Now, you may be scratching your head and say, what are you talking about? We don't do any kinyan at an engagement party. You're right, we don't do this. But in his community, they do the tanoim at the engagement party. We do the tanoim right before the wedding, on the night of the wedding. But in certain communities, even still today, they do the tanoim at the time of the engagement party. And that's to really make sure that everything is done. Like there's no backing out, there's no broken engagements. Okay, so.
So what would our timing be then? Our timing would be after the chuppah?
Probably it would be the day of the wedding. Yeah.
Talking here about success. But what about the timing after the child and no success?
Yeah, it's no different from any kind of broker. If you're a realtor and you want to try and find a house for me, so at what point, or you want to sell my house, who pays? I think it's the seller who pays the broker, right? Yeah. So let's say I ask you to sell my house, and you can't. You don't find the seller. You put in hours and hours of service, but those are the terms of being a broker, of being a realtor, and in this case, being a shadchan. Shadchan, I have firsthand knowledge of all the effort that goes into trying to make a shidduch. You seal the deal, it's great. You don't seal the deal, same number of hours that you put into it, right? So they're not entitled to compensation.
Like a commission.
It is. It's exactly what it is. It's yeah. He says just because they want to make a big seuda and they don't have enough money to pay the shadchan, that's not an excuse. They have to pay the shadchan. That's payment is due upon the writing up of the shtar erisim. Shiur demei shadchanas tolu lifi minhag hamakom v'ayin lekam and divrei maschil chasam. He says we'll talk about it later, but the general rule is that it all goes according to the convention of what shadchanim get paid. I will tell you there is no convention in our community. Someone tells you after they made the shidduch for your child, the minhag of our place in Toronto is to pay $4,000 for the shadchan. If that's never happened to me, no one's ever come to me with that issue. But if someone were to tell you that, you would have a right to say to them, I'm sorry, but that was not my understanding when we first started talking, that I was going to have to be hit with this kind of amount, because that's not the convention in my community. In other words, there is no standard convention for shadchanas, because if I'm not aware of it, and I'm the rabbi of the community, so then you have to assume that there is no fixed amount. There could be a stipulation that the shadchan makes at the outset, that I do this for parnasa, and I'm willing to work with you, but I want to make sure you understand that there is going to be a fee if I am successful, finder's fee, if I am successful. And it's best, like we've seen in so many other instances, to set up in advance what the terms of the shadchanis are going to be. So im hashadchan omar sha'osa pulaso shelo amanas lekabel pras ein sarach litain lo klum. Then another thing is that if the shadchan says, I'm doing this for no money, I'm not doing this, I just want to help, I want to do it for the mitzvah. So then if they seal the deal and then the shadchan says, no, you have something to give me, or let's say that the husband of the shadchan, right? A lot of times it's a woman, the husband of the shadchan whispers into the ear of the father and says, you should give my wife something. She put in, and it's probably true, she put in days of hours of work, and I'd like you to pay her something. So halachically, I have a right to turn over to the husband and say, listen, I appreciate all that she did, but she said at the outset that she was doing this for free because she wants to do the mitzvah. It becomes a very awkward and uncomfortable situation when these kinds of things come up. Someone says they want to do you a favor or they want to do a mitzvah, and then all of a sudden they expect you, they have this sense of expectation for compensation. So it becomes very difficult. Halachically, you're not under any obligation to pay. There may be social pressures that may compel you to give them something, right? Certainly, hakaras hatov, gratitude would demand that you give them some kind of monetary reward for having helped your child get engaged and move forward with their life. But you're not at their mercy. If the husband says to you, well, you should give my wife something out of hakaras hatov, I say, I agree. I was planning to present her with a very nice gift. So the husband says, well, how much are we talking about? And so then you say, well, I'm not at liberty to discuss it. Then you're right. You're within your rights. In other words, the husband can't start making demands after the fact, or anyone else, or the shadchan themselves can't start making, saying, well, the standard is, sorry, you said you were doing it for the mitzvah. He says there is a saying that is circulating in some religious circles, that you always have to pay the shadchan. Did you ever hear that before? I don't know if you've ever heard that, but people, you've heard this, Izzy?
Somebody else. I said, I know somebody that's waiting for Friday night dinner, me. If they get married, then I have a price to give both of them a gift. So I don't have to pay them $4,000. $1,000 a piece.
Yeah.
But inflation. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, Rabbi, could you quickly summarize what was said? We couldn't quite hear it.
Yeah. So there is a saying that is circulating, Rav Stern says, that people say that you're halachically obligated to pay the shadchan, even if they said they were doing it for the mitzvah. He says there is absolutely no basis for this in halacha, and it's something that should be abolished. This kind of attitude should be abolished, because there is no halachic imperative that you have to pay a shadchan. It's menschlich, it's proper, it's hakaras hatov, proper gratitude demands that you should pay someone something that they did for you, for which came at great effort on their part, and that had tremendously positive outcome. But to say that halachically you're at their mercy, that they can name their price, that's not true. Now, hamaftiach l'shadchan litain lo schar yoser mehamakubal mechlekubo haposkim yichayv lases lo mashi hivtiach. He says, now, what if there's an accepted fee for shadchanas, but you want the shadchan to be incentivized to work for you, put you at the top of his list, So you promise the shadchan to pay them double of what the normal fee is. So there's a machlokas as to whether you have to pay that amount, or whether you're allowed to say, well, I'm going to just pay you the standard. The The Ramah says that you only have to pay him the standard fee. And the Bach says, no, you have to pay whatever you told him you were going to pay. And it's certainly in a situation where the shadchan has already collected, or the money's in escrow and he takes the money, or he takes an item of value of yours as compensation, which is much more than what a standard shadchan would fetch. But he says, but this is what you promised me. He could then, if you took him to a din Torah, you would not prevail, because he could always say that I paskin like the Bach, that you're obligated to pay me whatever you agreed to. Now, it certainly seems more reasonable like the Bach, probably the rationale of the Ramah is that, let's see, he says, it all depends on how fixed the shadchanis fee is what he says in the footnote. If there is a fixed shadchanis fee that everyone in the community is paying $2,000, and I say to the guy, I'll pay you even $4,000, just get my kid married already. Can't stand having him in the house, right? So then, maybe the Ramah's argument is that it's only an asmachta. It's not a real pledge, because I just want to make sure that you're going to put my case as a priority, right? And that's my way of telling you expressing to you the urgency of the matter. He says that sometimes you have to split the shadchanis fee into three parts. There's a starter, there's a middleman, and then there's a closer. Okay? He says, and if there's only a starter and a closer, the minhag is to pay a third to the starter and 2/3 to the closer. Afilu haya biyacholis shel hashadchan harishon l'sayim avodasam lahashvosam b'chulei. B'kol makom ein lo shum tainu tvia v'hamaschil yikabel rak shlish. If there was a shadchan who could have done both the starting and the closing, but they allowed someone else to get involved, and that other person was able to do the closing, they still, even if the first person did the majority of the work, the closer always gets 2/3, and the person who started the whole thing gets 1/3. This happens all the time. This happens to my wife all the time. She goes ahead, recommends a certain boy or a certain girl for a shidduch. Nothing comes of it. And then another person comes along and aggressively moves to close the deal. So, bazelo magila rishon klom.
With the same shidduch.
With the same shidduch.
Right.
So sometimes my wife recommends it. The family says, okay, we'll look into it. And then they go to another person and say, could you take care of this for us? So that first person, which is usually my wife, doesn't end up with anything. Halachically, she's not entitled to anything. He says, because if the closer would not have come along and moved on this issue, then nothing would have come of it. And part of the argument is that the second shadchan didn't know anything about the first shadchan. They basically come in and the parent says, would you mind looking into this? We have a good recommendation for this boy or this girl. Would you mind taking a look at it? Okay, we'll continue this laws of Shiduchim, Shadchanas. We'll continue Mirza Hashem tomorrow. Have a great day.
Just go ahead. Bye-bye.
That's-